Hello, everyone, and welcome to Weekend Rental, episode 86. We are your gaming and geek culture podcast. My name is Ryan. As always, I'm joined by Andy.
Hey.
And Nate.
What's going on, guys?
All right, if you enjoy our content, you can find a load of wonderful other content, articles, podcasts, more, whether it's video games, movies, beer. It's all available over at geekade.com. What's your geek? So let's get right into this episode. It's going to be a special one, an interview, something we haven't done on this podcast for a while. We're going to be sitting down. We had a great discussion with Patrick Hickey Jr. And discussed his minds behind the games books and the work he does over at reviewfix.com. And with that, let's hear how that went. All right, so we're here with Patrick Hickey Jr. He's the author of The Minds Behind the Games and also founder of reviewfix.com. Pat, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's always nice to get to chat with new people in the community, and especially people who have an interesting take on it. As far as, you know, we do the podcast for fun, but it's always cool to see somebody who's been able to get their works published is kind of a critical next step. And you've got some credits on some games as well. Kind of touched on some voice acting work. One thing I wanted to know before we get into everything else is what was your introduction? What was your first console? What hooked you into gaming?
The NES, probably RBI baseball.
Nice.
I was always a big time baseball fan. I was like a freak when I was a kid. I learned how to read at 3 years old, and my dad would have his friends over to watch the Mets games and shit like that. And I remember one time he calls me and he's like, PJ, come in. So I go in and he goes to his friends. He's like, watch this. So he goes to me. He's like, what's Kevin McReynolds' batting average with runners in scoring position? And I'm like, 423. And one of his friends is like, he's a freak. Your son's a freak. He's 3, you know? So for me, it's being able to play a baseball game with real players at 4 years old was just mind shattering. It's bases loaded, baseball, all those games were fun, but to actually play with the real players, to be able to play with Willie Randolph and Don Mattingly and Mike Scott and Kent Herbeck and Kirby Puckett. I mean, it was life changing for me. And then when the Genesis game just took the sports experience to the next level. And
right.
Then I got a Super Nintendo, and I became a fan of the Japanese RPGs. And then the PlayStation took the Japanese RPG and the sports genre to the next level. So it was just complete teenage orgasm for me, you know. And then by the time the PS2 came out, I was ready for college, and I started writing. And then I was editor-in-chief of my college newspaper, and I was like, be a really good idea if I didn't have to pay for games anymore. So I started writing video game companies like Tecmo, Atlas, and they started sending me games. And then when I went to my next college, I told them, I'm like, guys, I'm going to another college. Can you send those games to this college instead? And they were like, yeah, sure. Then after I graduated college, I started ReviewFix and so on, NBC. And it's just, I feel like I've been writing about video games. I mean, I've been writing about video games now for 15 years. So it's it's longer
Wow.
than some people. Some of my readers, I have readers sometimes, before this whole COVID craziness happened. I had a 12-year-old girl come up to me, and she read the first book, and we were BSing about Night Trap and stuff like that. And I was like, I've been writing about games longer than you've been alive. I felt so old, you know, but it's been such a fun journey. And it's all because of my dad. My dad worked at a printing company in the city with my uncle, and they just played NES all day. They didn't do anything.
That sounds like a good problem to have.
I'm telling you. But my dad would get his ass kicked all the time by my uncle. So my dad would bring the games home, and then he started playing against me, and then I would kick his ass, but he actually got better by playing against me. And then he would beat my uncle. And then when I would go into work with my dad to hang out, over the summer, my dad would bet my uncle $5 or lunch or whatever. He's like, I bet my son could beat you in ice hockey for lunch, you know, stuff like that. And yeah, that was the beginning of it. The NES, man, crazy.
That sounds
awesome.
like the coolest upbringing ever. You know, to have parents in that day and age, especially when the consoles first came out, there was that craze of it's rotting your brain and all of that stuff. And so to have parents say, Hey, yeah, let's play. Get me better at this game. That's pretty impressive.
My parents totally did not know better. They were young when they had me. I love them to death, but white trash. And we didn't have a lot of money growing up. It was like a Ghostface Killer video. We were like plucking roaches out the cereal box. And
Wow.
but if you had a console, so it's like you could be poor, but if you had enough money for a console and a game like every couple of weeks, things weren't so bad. And my dad was always in the city, and he would bring home stuff like Wonder Boy and Monsterland and King's Bounty and PGA Tour golf, and he would bring home really cool shit. And like he was a big baby that way, and we used to play all the time. And then by the time the PlayStation came, he was like done. He was done with video games. But I mean,
Sure.
for a good 10, 12 years, we used to play all the time. So it was a lot of fun. Even like I used to get him to play GoldenEye with me on Nintendo 64. And I used to clean his clock in the WCW games on Nintendo 64. And he used to use Scott Norton all the time, which he looks like, my father looks like Scott Norton. It's scary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's like 5'11", like 260, like Donkey Kong body, all arms and legs, So after a while of like kicking his ass, it was just he would get pissed off, and I'm like, you know what? Let me not piss the guy off anymore. So then he stopped playing. He kind of like bowed out. He retired. He went off into the sunset. But crazy.
So when you said that, so when you were kind of just talking a little bit about how your journey has progressed a little bit, you mentioned writing, being bold enough to write a letter to like Tecmo and Atlas and all that stuff. What was that like for them to actually say, yeah, I want to send you some stuff? I mean, I'm sure they're getting letters all the time from a ton of people. So what made you stand out outside of like all of these people that, what kind of sparked that? What kind of excited you with actually getting games?
Well, at first I sent like a full frontal nude to them.
That always works.
So I was trying to get him to spit out his drink. I saw him drinking. I'm like, if I could get him to spit out his drink, that would be great. No, I had some really solid journalism professors when I was in college, and they helped me craft. Like they helped me understand from a very early age as a writer that your pitch is very important. And that people have to be able to see who you are and what you stand for in as little space as possible. So if you're going to send a pitch and it's like 10 pages, no one's going to read it. So it's like 2 paragraphs, just like, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. And I've always been good at the pitch, at like convincing people, talking in elevators, talking in bathrooms to editors and just being like, bro, I want to write this. And like washing their hands like, oh, okay. All right. And everyone would be like, how the hell did you get that assignment? And I'm like, we were, he got out of the bathroom at the same time as me, and I was just like, oh, I want to interview the community manager of Last of Us. Like, oh, but why you? I was in the bathroom and you weren't, So it's just, tight, well-written pitches. I mean, this is the thing. If you're a great journalist, you probably get shot down like 75% of the time with your pitches. So if you get like 1 out of 4, you're a rock star, And back then, I mean, I was like 10%. I was getting like, but I sent letters to like Sony, to Sega, Tecmo, all of these places. And the only places that responded back in the beginning were Tecmo and Atlas. So whatever they sent me, I would play the shit out of and write as thoughtful and honest reviews as possible. And then as I graduated, I started writing for better places. So then I met more publicists and things like that. So it's just like journalism is like a scaffolding thing. It's just like you meet better people, you make better connections, and then everyone's moving up at the same time. So I just had that idea drilled into me from a very early age to just give people your best in as short amount of time as possible, make a lasting impression, and you'll be okay. And the rest will come. So that's kind of like what I've stuck with through the last 15 years. Oh my God.
So at what point did you kind of turn the corner from like doing those type of reviews and those type of articles to more interview based?
I've always loved to do interviews. So when I started Review Fix, I obviously was doing a ton of reviews, but then I had other people that were writing reviews. So I'm just like, you know what, let them do that. Let me do interviews. And I started, making connections and doing more interviews. And then when I was at Examiner, I mean, at one time I was the most read video game writer on Examiner.com before they closed down. And I was doing a ton of interviews for them, like indie game developers, which I always found interesting. Like one guy in his basement, with his washing machine behind him, making a game, and I always love those people, like those one-man bands, because I mean, I feel like my entire life, that's kind of like how I've been. I'm the first college graduate in my family. I'm the first person in my family not to do drugs or alcohol, so it's like I've always kind of felt like I was this one-man wolf pack. So I always like to interview people that were like that. Then when I got to NBC, NBC was basically like, we don't want any reviews. Like, that's basura. Like, we want you to do like some real reporting. So then it was just like, okay, all right. So I already had a whole bunch of contacts. So then it was just like, okay, I call up Rockstar. Oh, you guys sold, 100 million, in carts. How does that feel? And then, now I'm writing a finance piece about video games, or, then I'm interviewing, the people on Epic Mickey 2 about how they got Oswald the Rabbit into the game and the licensing deal and stuff like that. So that NBC was great for that. And then by the time I left NBC, I got married. And then I was just at the point where my wife was about to have our first child. And I felt like I wanted to write something that would stand the test of time. Examiner closing really hurt me because I had like 3,000 articles on there and they were just gone. So I ended up like, transplanting them to ReviewFix, but it's not the same, so I'm like, how do I write something that when I die will still be around? And the only answer was to write a book. So I was just sitting in my man cave and I'm just like, what the hell do I write about? And I had a conversation with one of my bosses, and my original plan was to like build the multimedia journalism program at my college because I'm a college professor. And my boss was like, yeah, no. So this was a guy that had like tenure and he's coasting for like the next 20 years. He doesn't have to do anything. And I'm just like, that's not me. I don't want to do that. So I'm like, I want to push myself. So I'm sitting in my man cave and I'm just like, I'm going to write a book about video games. And I just started pulling out games, Wonder Boy and Monsterland, King's Bounty, Toe Jam and Earl, E.T., Mutant League Football. And I'm like, I know who created these games. So let me reach out to them. It goes back to what we were talking about before, the pitch. Write them a damn good pitch and keep my fingers crossed. And within like a week or two, all of the original people, the 6 or 7 people that I pitched, all answered me. So then this was like Halloween of 2016. So like 4 weeks later, Thanksgiving, I have like 6 chapters written. My wife is like 6, 7 months pregnant. She's laying down, we just had Thanksgiving dinner and I'm bored. So I'm like, you know what, let me send a pitch out to a publisher and see what happens. And 3 days later, McFarlane is like, yeah, we want it. And they're like, okay, you got 6 or 7 games. This is great, but this book needs to be like 80,000 words. So you're going to need at least 23 games.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So I'm like, oh my God, how the hell am I going to do this? So then I'm just like, you know what? I went to the grindstone and I'm just like, pitch. Like I was sending 20, 30 pitches a day. By the time the first book was finished, I had 36 games. So it worked out great. But it's just like I've met so many people over the last, 3 or 4 years. And I think that's when the corner turns. So I tell my journalism students all the time, like anyone can write a review, and people write reviews to various skill levels, but to do an interview with somebody, to sit down with somebody and to get them to tell you something that's nowhere else online, and to have somebody place faith in you and tell you their story, that's a skill. That's something that somebody can't take away from you. So that's what I wanted to do. I've seen so many video game books out where it's like, oh, the 100 greatest this, and oh, my favorite games, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I want to do something different. And I've also seen like books out where in the forward, it's like, oh, some of the events in this book didn't take place the way they occurred. And they've been increased for dramatic effect and blah, 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 blah. It's like, I think Console Wars has that in there. If you read the forward to Console Wars. And I remember everyone was talking about that book and I read it and I absolutely loved it. And, but I remember in the forward, I'm like, so what did you change?
Right.
And we don't know. And the thing is, he got Seth Rogen to write the intro and it's such a good book. Like if you feel like the fly on the wall to all of these like crazy moments between Sega and Nintendo, but then you have to ask the question, if you changed one thing in that book to make it cooler. To me, as a journalist and as a journalism professor, it's fiction. So
Sure.
nothing in my book is like that. I haven't stretched anything. Everything is word for word spot on, and it's like a part of my legacy. So to answer your question, I'm sorry. I feel like I turned the corner when that day when I decided to write the book, and I decided not to really write reviews anymore, and to try and protect the legacy and the history of the video game industry.
Yeah. No, that's what I liked about your book too, is it's like, well, for one, I like that it's a lot of games, because that's the thing with like any sort of like entertainment is like not every song or movie is going to connect with everyone. But there's enough stories in here that like, yeah, I might not have cared, but I go into it and read it anyway, find out something cool, but then it goes on to the next page. I turn it over and here's this game I absolutely love. And I'm finding out some cool stuff on, like, I loved the Boy and His Blob, finding out that was done in 6 weeks. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And then we kind of had a running gag on the podcast because we used to do a segment where we would play games and decide if we would buy, rent, and burn them every episode. And we fell into a David Crane rut. And it was like that whole era of like David Crane's Amazing Tennis, David Crane's Boy and His Blob. So we ended up even just doing like a movie review segment for a while. And we just called it David Crane's Amazing Movie Time. So like to read the David Crane stuff was just like, oh yeah, this totally connects because we all love that stuff. And
he's such a cool
really
guy
cool.
too. He's such a cool guy, total rock star. The fact that like, I remember when he answered me, I was waiting for the bus at like 10:30 at night on my way home. And I just read the email and I'm just like, yeah, one of the only other times I've been that happy was when, I got Dave Cowan, the lead programmer of the original Grand Theft Auto on PlayStation. When I got him, I was just like, now we got a book, so like when Dave got back to me, and then Dave just made it super easier for me to talk to other people because, again, when writing the pitch to other people, I could say, oh, I'm working on the book, and by the way, I've already spoken to David Crane. So then people will go, oh, well, David Crane spoke to you, I'll talk to you, blah, 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 blah. And it even like in funny situations like Howard Scott Warshaw, the guy that did E.T. and Yar's Revenge and Indiana Jones, he's not like the biggest fan of David Crane's work. So it's
really?
like, so it's like if you read The Minds Behind the Adventure Games, that's my second book. I have Pitfall in there where I spoke to David, and then I spoke to Howard about Indiana Jones. And Howard was just basically, he's like, for Indiana Jones, I wanted to make like the biggest game. And he's like, because everyone talks about how David Crane's Pitfall is the biggest game, but it's like the same goddamn screen over and over and over again. Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, like he was adamant about like that he was more of an artist than David Crane. And like they're both amazing. So Howard is like one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. So, but just to have like that little back and forth, like indirect back and forth between the two of them was great. So it's been so much fun.
Nice. Well, that's so hilarious too, because those two are the two people that always show up to retro game
every
conventions
convention, yes,
to do panels. So it's like a lot of times they're doing back-to-back panels even, So, wow. Huh.
Yeah. Man, imagine if those two had worked on something together though back in that era. That would have been great.
I don't know if it would have worked out though, because it's like
heads. Yeah.
Yeah, because Howard was like a massive like party guy, and David got like brought in like to video games, like because he played tennis with like, other developers and stuff like that, and like kind of cut from like a different cloth.
Sure.
I don't know. And like, I learned so much about E.T. by interviewing Howard, but then it was like when I was working on the fourth book that's coming out in December, The Minds Behind the Shooter Games, I spoke to Robbie Phillip, who did Missile Command on the Atari 2600, and he also did Night Trap. I mean, he's the man.
Wow.
He said the biggest difference between he did Space Invaders for the Atari ST, and it was a commercial like flop. He wasn't happy with it. And he said the biggest difference between that and Missile Command was for Missile Command, he had his door open the entire time, and he would allow other developers to come in and play the game. Like sure. he wasn't in that tunnel, and he was just like, he's like, Pat, down the hole, Howard Scott Warshaw was working on E.T., and he was literally locked in a dark room all day. He didn't speak to anybody, and I'm just like, he didn't tell me that. Like he told me how exhausting the process was and stuff, but like when you have Robbie Fulop tell the story about how like the door was locked, black room, it just makes you admire the guy a little bit more and makes you appreciate ET more, because there's so many fanboys and streamers out there that all they do is shit on ET, and it's just like, I've played worse games than ET before, you know?
Yeah.
And I certainly played worse games that didn't sell 1.6 million copies. So
Well,
we've played them all on the buy rent burn, so all the worst ones.
And that's the thing I've always told people about ET was like, I'm an NES kid too, but like my first console ever was a hand-me-down 2600, and I had ET. I played ET a lot. I never thought it was like the most amazing game, but I certainly didn't walk away as a kid being like, oh, this is trash. Like, I got to play as what kind of looked like ET in an Atari game, which was rare for anything to look like the source material. So
I think about it, it's an open world game on the Atari 2600.
Yeah.
Like, it actually pushed the limits of what the 2600 was able to do. You know, there's some amazing games on the 2600, but they're all like rooted in beauty by simplicity.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like Berserk is this amazing third person shooter that's just super simple. And then you have this amazing enemy that follows you and goes through walls and stuff, but it's still super simple. There was nothing simple about ET. You know? So
yeah. I mean, especially, you know, one man in a room, 5 weeks. I mean,
1 man, 5 weeks. You know, it's like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How did I've heard some other podcasts, but how did the whole voice acting and getting into that side of the games happen from your writing?
So like, I grew up in the early 90s, late 80s, you know. I'm 37 now. But I grew up like with the Jerky Boys. I was making prank phone calls. Like the guy up, you know, the Arabic deli owner up the block used to get phone calls like every day from me, you know, in different voices, and he would play along, like, you know, he knew it was me. And I used to have a blast, and I always used to do voices. I used to do like, you know, the intercom, and like I watched Police Academy, and like I loved just fucking with people. But the thing was, I ended up becoming a college professor and a writer. So it's just like, when do you do voices if you do stuff like that? Like a couple of times I was joking around in NBC and I would do voices and people would think it was funny, but then they're like, oh, you know, tone it down. Like everyone's, you know, all tight ass up there, you know, in 30 Rock, you know. So what happened was, after the first book came out, I was planning a sequel, but I got right back to work with Review Fix. Like I never stopped writing for Review Fix. I still every day write for Review Fix. I go on Twitter and I search for sexy indie games to do interviews. So I found this game called The Padre, and it looked like Minecraft, but like the lighting was excellent, and it had really good music, and it was like a Catholic priest walking through like this forest, and then this tree just like bitch slaps him, like the tree comes alive, and it looked like one of the trees from like the Wizard of Oz, you know.
Okay.
It was really cool. So I messaged the developer, and I was like, let's do an interview. So he's like, okay. So I find out that I am the first person to interview him. So we start bullshitting on Facebook. Really nice guy, Ben Silhali. So then he's like, do you want to play the game? It's in beta. This is after the interview. So I'm like, sure. So right away, like playing the game, it's like an homage to Alone in the Dark. So point and click survival horror, jump scares, really cool. But there's typos all over the place, like in the text. And if you're going to have a point and click game, it's mostly text. So thankfully, you know, master's degree in journalism, English and journalism professor, I was like, guys, if you want me to edit this, let's talk. So we spoke, we came up with a price, and I edited like the entire script in like a day. Like, because I wanted to show them that I wasn't fucking around, and I did it in like a day. And then they're like, oh, here's the update. And put in the update. And I'm like, well, my changes are there. I'm like, I actually like contributed to this. They paid me right away. I'm like, this is fun. I could do this more. You know, a couple of weeks later, they send me more edits. So I'm like, oh, so this is like a repeating thing? And they're like, yeah, you're story editor now. So
nice.
I'm like, this is awesome. This is awesome. So, but I'm getting to play the game, like, and see stuff that nobody else could see. And, oh, so good. I'm really connecting with like the story, you know. I'm suggesting things to go in the story. So there's like some Roddy Piper, They Live, and like Luke Cage references in the game that come from me, cool stuff like that, So now we're getting ready to go to Kickstarter, and these guys are from Bulgaria, so English isn't their second language, so you got to cut them some slack, and they're like, Pat, we need you to edit the Kickstarter, like all the words in the Kickstarter. And I'm like, that's a lot of pressure, man. Because it's like, if your Kickstarter is riddled with typos, no one's going to invest in you.
Right.
So like these guys don't know me like that. I'm the only person in the United States on the team. It's 6 other guys in Bulgaria, and they just trust me. And I'm just like, wow. Like, I felt really appreciated. So I edit everything.
And a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. But I took it in stride. I did it. And now, like, we're getting ready. We're like 2 weeks away from the Kickstarter being launched. And they're like, the voice actor left. And I'm like, what? They're like, oh, he had like personal problems. I'm like, and I hate that because I'm a college professor and I hear that shit all the time. Oh, professor, I have personal problems and I have this and I have that. And I'm just like, I don't make excuses for anything. I do what I have to do because at the end of the day, like, nobody cares. You need to get what you need to get done, and that's it, So then I was like, you know what, guys? I'm like, it's all good. I was like, he sucked anyway. I could do the voice. And they're like, what? I'm like, it's supposed to be a scary game, and this guy sounds like Russell Brand. It's just like, just like walking through like Nate and Amber Douglas's house, and it's just like all scary, washing machines and wow, I'm like, no, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. So I've always been good at that Don LaFontaine. In a world, one man, one tortilla. And I'm just like, I can't do that because that would just be laughable. Like, no one would be able to play the game. They just laugh their asses off,
Right.
So I'm like, what if I combine like that debonair, like English character? Because that's what they were going for, like a older charismatic English man with that bass, because you need that bass if you're doing a horror game. You need that low. So a boy came up with this dark English voice. My name is Alexander, and I am the Padre, and I am a servant of God. And I sent it to them, and they were like, all right. I'm nice. Like, and they go, can you record all the dialogue today? And I'm just like, and literally like trying to find it in my register, finding that voice, like I was coughing up blood. Like my vocal cords were fried trying to find it. And then when I found it, I was like, oh shit, like that's it. So I recorded everything, and then they send me the update, and it's like the same day. They had everything in. And I'm just like, so we didn't get funded on Kickstarter, which sucked. Oh, okay. But I had done so many podcasts and so many interviews, and we did so many email interviews, and we like promoted the shit out of the game that we ended up getting picked up by Feardemic, and they published the first game on Steam, Xbox One, PS4, Switch, so it's like, holy shit.
That's awesome.
The voice of a main character in a game. Holy crap. And now the Padre 2 is coming out soon. I just finished doing all the VO for that. And I'm working on a whole bunch of other, like next year I'm probably going to have 4 games with writing credits and a couple with voice acting credits. And one of them is this game called Run, Die, Run Again. It's made by Tony Barnes. You guys probably know Tony Barnes from like Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, Urban Strike, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Star Wars Episode 3, Strider 2014, Medal of Honor 2010. He's awesome. So it's like a first-person platforming game with a really cool story. So I do VO for the narrator in that game, which is really fun. I also wrote the story for this retro shooter called Kroom, Kroom, and the animator on that game is Pete Paquette, and he was the senior animator on BioShock Infinite, and he's also done he's done all the keyframe animations for Overwatch. He's worked on Madden. He's a pro. So like I was on his podcast, and at the end of his podcast, he was like, if you want to do more work in the video game industry, let me know. And nice. I was like, I'm letting you know.
Now,
like right away on his show. And 2 weeks later, we ended up having a conversation, and he presented like this kind of like skeleton for a story. He's like, this is what I want you to do. And I'm just like, these characters don't have names. I'm like, there's a whole lore that needs to be written. I'm like, you're giving me like a skeleton. And he's like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, you know that I'm a nonfiction writer, right? You know that I'm a journalist, right? And he goes, yeah, but you can do it. He goes, you've interviewed all these video game developers. He's like, you know what goes into a good game. You can do it. And he completely trusted me.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And then I wrote the story for that game, and I'm the voice of the main character in that game too. So COVID's kind of slowed us down a little bit, but
Sure.
I'm really looking forward to getting back on that. And there's a bunch of stuff I can't talk about because of NDAs, but like, oh man, there's like 2 or 3 projects right now that I cannot wait for 2021 when they come out. To just like having a game that's on Steam and that you can download is awesome. Like I've gone over people's houses and they're like, we're going to download Padre right now. Oh, by the way, go in front of the TV so we can take your picture, you know, or like, and everyone's drinking.
Turn the volume down, have you read it.
Yeah, like stupid stuff like that. It's so cool. But it's like next year, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be able to walk into like a GameStop and pick up one of my games.
Yeah,
So
That's awesome.
that's like the dream, you know. And I still have I have 3 books out now. By the end of next year at this time, I'll have like at least 2 more out, definitely 3 by 2022. So like this whole journey is just still in its infancy, but I've done so much in the last 3 years. It's been nuts.
Wow.
It sounds like it. That's incredible. And voiceover, I mean, I think that's such an interesting job anyways. I mean, voiceovers for many games, it can often make or break a game. Just, you know, you have some, I can't even remember what I was playing, but some big burly guy show up and then it's like this tiny little voice, like you said, this like, what happened? I think they got the wrong guy for this. Did they mix things up? And so, I mean, that's a lot of pressure on your shoulders to get the voice and to make that character and actually make it make sense. And that's pretty awesome.
I think like being able to edit all of the dialogue in the game played a huge role because I tried to make him sound the way I heard him in my head.
Sure.
You know? And it's like every time I would play through the game and I would hear this guy talk, I would cringe. And it's not because he's bad. Like I could totally see this guy. I don't even know his name. I could totally see him in like a Leisure Suit Larry or something like that, you know, or something like offbeat and fun, but not in this game. And again, Ben's gave me a huge opportunity. Pete gave me a huge opportunity. Like Tony Barnes is like one of the coolest, most down to earth people in video games, and he trusts me. So it's just like wow. So I've been very fortunate to meet the right people and for them to trust me, not only to tell their story, but to work on their games.
Well, I got to imagine now that like you've got the books behind you, you've got the interviews, but now you're like in these games, you've got like credits, like that's got to open up so many more. I mean, has it gotten easier then with subsequent interviews because it's so much easier to just make connections?
So like I'll give you guys an example. For the PlayStation book that I'm working on now. So like the first 3 books are out. The Minds Behind the Games, The Minds Behind the Adventure Games, The Minds Behind the Sports Games. Those are out. The Minds Behind the Shooter Games comes out like in December or January. And then I have The Minds Behind the Sega Genesis games, which is finished. And I'm working on The Minds Behind the Sony PlayStation games right now. I started, like I told you, I had to get at least 23 games for the first book. And it was so hard because I didn't know any of these people and this and that. I was able to get 35 games confirmed for the PlayStation book in about a month and a half.
Wow.
I was sending pitches and writing chapters while my wife was in labor. I was because of COVID, they wouldn't let me stay in the room until she was like ready to, you know. And I'm just like, yo, if I'm gonna sit here, I'm gonna like go crazy because like I want to be in there, you know. And I'm like, if I can't be in there, I'm gonna just start sending pitches. And I'll never forget like Kellen Hatch. He's worked on like Warhawk and Twisted Metal and Jet Moto, and Brian Campbell, who's worked on Twisted Metal and Jet Moto, and Charles Pagagi, who did level design on Parasite Eve. They just got back to me, and they're like, yeah, we'll talk to you. And they're sending me answers, and I'm just writing on my iPhone, like waiting for my son to be born. And it was just like, that was in May, and now we're in November, and I have 37 chapters for that book written already. Wow. So that book isn't even finished, and it's bigger than my first book.
Dude, you're a machine. You are a machine.
And the thing is too, it's just like, it's like that thirst. Once you kind of get it, once one developer says yes to you, you're just like, okay, let's try and get another one. Let's try and get another one. And then the thing is too, I have to say, I have amazing readers, and my followers on Twitter and especially Instagram, they're so vocal to me. Like I remember when I was working on the adventure book, They were like, we want Croc. Remember Croc? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, yeah.
You
so
and
then
5
I went
other
out.
people.
Yeah. But I was like, you know what? If you want it and you're going to buy the book, I'll do it for you.
Yeah.
You know? And I got Croc. And it was like the same thing with Night Trap. I remember when I announced Night Trap, I had 2 or 3 people come over to me. They're like, why the fuck is Night Trap in your book? Like, it's like one of the biggest flops in gaming history. I'm like, because there's a story there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I don't care about like the review scores and stuff like that. I'm like, that's the last thing I care about. I'm like, it's got an interesting story, and I want to be able to tell it. And all 3 of those people, they all told me after. They're like, Night Trap is the best chapter of the first book. I'm like, I know.
Yeah, I really liked that one.
I'm like, I saw it.
I mean, it's perfect timing too, you know, with like Night Trap kind of had that resurgence with what was it, Limited Run? I can't remember.
It was Limited Run.
Yeah,
and so that buzz started happening again with Night Trap, and everybody that crapped all over the game all of a sudden became a big fan of it.
So I'll tell you, my manuscript was due in like 5 days, and I remember one of my students, because I was talking about the book with my students, because I'm like, I'm writing this for you. I'm like, all the things that I tell you to do with your sources and how to write, I'm like, I'm writing the book the way I teach you to write. I'm like, if you're interested in video games, like, this is like, I'm trying to write something that will not only help you as a lover of the industry, as a gamer, but as a journalist, like how to do an interview the right way, this and that, blah, 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 blah. So I remember one of my students messages me like a BuzzFeed article, and it's just like, Night Trap 25th anniversary re-release by the Screaming Villains, blah, blah, blah. And they interviewed the team. And I emailed them right away, and I'm like, guys, I have a book that I have to send into my publisher in like 5 days. I need to send you like 10 questions through email and do like a quick Skype with you, like 15 minutes, and let's get you in this book. And they were like, yeah, okay.
Nice.
So it was just, and at that point, I didn't even have a first book out, you know? So they were taking a chance on me. So I've been, again, I don't like to say luck because I hate that word. Oh, you're lucky. It's like, like, what does that even mean? You know, but it's just like, I feel like I hit at the right time, because they were probably being interviewed by a lot of people at that time. And they probably were like, oh shit, this guy's writing a book. Yeah, let's get in that too, you know?
Right.
So, but it worked out. Yeah. So it's like right around the time that the first book was released, Night Trap got the 25th anniversary remaster. Wonder Boy, The Dragon's Trap came out.
Yep.
You know, there was a whole bunch of like cool stuff going around the games that I was writing about. So it was perfect
timing.
Well, and wasn't that
That's
Mutant
incredible.
League like spiritual successor pretty close
Mutant
too?
League, same exact thing. And then Michael Mentheim is I'm pretty sure he's almost like he's in at least 3 books of mine. So when he did the Kickstarter for the first Mutant Football League, I interviewed him for NBC and for Examiner and for my site. Like, I tried to promote that as much as possible, because I felt like this is a guy that made great stuff on the Genesis, and like, he needs an opportunity to try and make his stuff again. So like, I promoted it hardcore. So when I started the book stuff, I was like, remember that little Q&A that we did? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I want to use that as a springboard to something bigger. And he's like what? I'm like, chapter in a book. So we ended up doing Mutant League Football for the first book. Then we did Mutant League Hockey for the sports book. And then we're doing Army Men, Sarge's Heroes for the
nice.
PS1 book.
Yep.
So yeah, he's been awesome. And that's the thing too. There's so many developers that have such wide-ranging portfolios. So I've hit up David Crane, Gary Kitchen a whole bunch of times. And because sometimes people don't connect the dots. They don't go, oh, the guy that did Mutant League Football did Army Men? Really? He did Battle Tanks too? What? Because for some reason or another, like, you guys know that Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld created Seinfeld. You know that like Quincy Jones wrote so much of Michael Jackson stuff, you know? But if I say who created Grand Theft Auto, you go, oh, Rockstar. And so many gamers do it. And I hate it. Pardon my French, but I fucking hate it. I had a conversation the other day with somebody on Instagram, and they're like, I really like what you're doing, but, you know, I don't really play games that way. Like, if I like Crash Bandicoot, I just play all the games. Like, I don't really care. And I'm like, you're so dumb that you don't even know how dumb you are. And I was like, let me explain. I was like, there's like 15 different Crash Bandicoot games out. I'm like, I guarantee you there's not one person that's on all 15 of those teams. All of those games play different from one another. All 15 of those games have a story behind them. All 15 of those games play different. If you understand that, you understand the game more, you're smarter for it, you appreciate the game more. That's what I want to do. I'm like, I want you to appreciate these games that you've spent hours upon hours of playing and never thought to imagine all the shit that was going on while these games were being created. So some people get it and some people don't. Some people will never get it, but then some people, they're kind of like, oh wait, like ET was only done in 5 weeks. Oh my god, let me play it again. Or I have one guy in Long Island, big Islander fan, so I like him because I'm an Islander fan. I'm like the only Islander fan in Brooklyn. And he messaged me and he's like, bro, I bought Fighting Force, this game, that game. He's like, I bought like 5 games in the first book after reading the chapter. And I'm like, I love you. I'm like, that's awesome. Because that's what I want to do. I want to connect you to your favorite and not so favorite games in a way that you've never been connected before. That's the whole point of the whole journey for me.
Well, I think it's really interesting, especially like, when you connect with those games in your books that were formative to you growing up, like that's a big thing. And like, speaking, I'm the kind of the same age, grew up in the same era, so I was in college, I really loved I'm a big fan of the history behind this stuff. So I would go to like blogs and there was no YouTube or anything at the time. Sure, we had like EGM was still being published, but nobody really like gave you the backstory. So I'm learning on these like weird back forums, like how Nintendo started, like what the Wonder Swan was. Why had I never heard of this? And like, so I appreciate that aspect of like you just diving in and getting to like the important details behind it. Cause it is art, right? Like I agree with you. It's like frustrating when you hear somebody just say like publisher, like, no, there's like, let's really appreciate what happened here because we do it with every other form of media, but for some reason gaming, it's hard in the mainstream for that to catch on.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk to people that have hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and stuff, and they don't know the difference between like first party and third party games. They don't know the difference between a developer and a publisher. And then it's just like, I'll watch videos on YouTube by super popular YouTubers, and it's like you're just reading what's on the Wikipedia page.
Right, that they wrote. Probably.
It's like, what are you adding to the conversation? So that's the thing. I like everyone, like even the weakest chapter of one of my books, when you're done reading the chapter, which again, it's written in a way where like you're taking the train in New York City and you've only got like 10 minutes to read a chapter. Like that's the way I set it up. So this way you could jump in and jump out and get a lot of information, enjoy it, and then move on. If you read a chapter of one of my books and you don't come away with at least 2 or 3 things that you didn't know before, I dropped the ball. And I'm like John Riggins, back in the day, like Washington Redskins, like you got to pry that ball out of my hands because I don't drop it very often. So as far as like the reporting goes, so that's the thing. You've got people that have such a wonderful opportunity to connect with hundreds of thousands of people on a daily basis, like these super popular YouTubers that do video game stuff, and they don't do interviews, and then they label games. They say, oh, this game sucks. This game is good. This game is bad. But they don't tell us why. It's like little microcosm here. When my daughter tells me that she loves me, she's 3, I say, why? And she's got to explain herself to me, because if she can't, then she doesn't know, And it's just like you're having a conversation with a friend. Oh, did you buy Ghost of Tsushima? Yeah. Is it good? Yeah, it's good. What did you learn? You learned nothing.
Right.
Like let's have real conversations about games. What does it play like? What does it remind you of? What does the score remind you of? Like, how does the game feel when you play it? How do you feel when you play? Where does it, these are all the things that like a lot of reviewers don't even mention in their reviews. And then you see in a lot of IGN reviews, I think, and it's just like, this is crap, Yeah.
So it's so basic, there are real things to review, but I think a lot of people focus on instant graphics and instant controls. And if they're like, controls weren't good, it's a pretty crappy game. And they limit everything. They put it in this just tiny little box. And so I like that you're you press for more. Like, yeah, tell me about the music. Maybe the controls did suck, but I bet you that music score was great, or whatever.
What's the reason why that the controls sucked?
Yeah.
You know, like, explain it to me. It's like, I remember, I think his name is Dean Takahashi. He's a video game journalist, and he couldn't beat the tutorial in Cuphead. And he was just bitching and moaning on social media, and he was tagging all of these AAA developers.
Right.
And these AAA developers were like ragging on the Cuphead team. And my whole thing is, it's just like, you don't have to be the world's greatest gamer to beat the tutorial of Cuphead. What do you have to do? You have to realize that the enemies move in patterns. You've got to be quick on, like, maybe had carpal tunnel or something like that. I don't know. But it's just like, you're going to like destroy a game's reputation on social media because you can't beat the tutorial. You know, it's kind of like, I tell my students all the time, I don't like Justin Bieber. I'm not a Bieber. I don't have Bieber fever, you know, but I understand why people like him. You know, he's charismatic. He's cool. You know, baby, oh, like, it's catchy. It's catchy. So like, my whole thing is like, when I go to interview a developer, I try and go in not with, oh, I love this game, or, oh, I played this game as a kid. I go in with, okay, this game has a legacy. It sold this many copies, or it's polarizing. People feel this way about it. People feel that way about it. And I basically tell the developer, I'm like, all right, let's pretend everything on Wikipedia is bullshit, because most of the time it is. And let's just go through, how did you get into the video game industry? What inspired this game? What was the team like? And I keep all the opinion. I try and keep as much of the opinion out of it as possible, and just let them tell me a story, you know, and all I do is try and provide context when in my writing, you know, that's in the chapter. And I feel like people learn a lot more because they don't go in saying, oh, this is the best game ever. You know, they just go in, this is another game with a really cool story. And by the time the chapter's over, now I get to make the decision whether or not I'm gonna play this or not. So yeah, that's what I try and do.
It's very apparent too, like in your writing too, like the way you've done it, you're not guiding questions to like your preferences and views, which I think is pretty huge, because you don't really get that anywhere these days. So it's nice just to hear, you know, the person's take and their experience, and you're just, like you said, contexting it. It's great.
Because it's like, again, at the end of the day, who gives a shit what Patrick Hickey Jr. thinks? Who cares?
Right.
Like, who really, like, I there's a video game store pretty close to my house that I hang out in, you know, a couple of times a week. I'm like Norm from Cheers. You know, I go there and stuff and bullshit, and people know who I am, and my book is in like the front of the store, like in the window and stuff like that. It's really funny. But like, people will go, oh, should I buy this? And I'll go, you should buy it because the producer of that actually worked on Star Wars Battlefront and blah, 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 blah. And they'll go, no, is it good? And I'm like, I can't answer that. I'm like, right. I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to be.
That's when you sell your book. And then you're like, hey, let me sell you this book, and then you'll know.
It's happened plenty of times where like the people will like leave and they'll like buy the book on, like, I'll be like, oh, you could PayPal me the book right now, and I'll have it sent to you in like 4 or 5 days, and they'll go, okay, and then they leave the video game store not buying anything, but they bought my book, you know. So, but that's the thing. I want to have real conversations with people about games. You know, and about the people, because we know so little about the people that make these games.
Yeah. So how did you target, like, obviously the Warshaws and the David Cranes are pretty apparent on finding those, but when you're doing something like the common EA Sports game, how did you target the person there, and how did you find the story?
So NHLPA 93 was probably like the first hockey game that I ever like truly fell in love with, because again, real players, you know. Ice hockey, Blades of Steel, those are all great, you know, but to be able to play NHLPA 93 with like Pierre Turgeon and like Mario Lemieux and Gretzky and stuff, it was just like, yo, this is great. So I naturally wanted to speak to those guys because that game had an impact on me, but I didn't know any of the behind the scenes stuff. So I'm like, okay, so I have to not be a fanboy here. I have to write this as objectively as possible, but I need to speak to this guy because this is an important game. Like, this is like the father to NHL 94, and NHL 94 is arguably considered the greatest hockey game of all time. So, and I'm like, if I have NHL 94 in the book, everyone's going to be like, oh, we know the story. It's the greatest hockey game of all time. But NHLPA 93, people don't know all the backstory. So that's how I kind of tried to do stuff. It's like in the Genesis book that I'm working on now, it's basically finished. It's got 43 games in it. It's the biggest book I've done so far. But I'm like, I had to get a Sonic game. Had to. And I originally was going to do Sonic Spinball because I'm just like, who the hell knows the backstory of Sonic Spinball? And then the developer...
Andy does. That's it.
The developer ended up like backing out on me. And I was just so pissed. I'm like, how the hell am I going to do a Sega book without having a Sonic game? And then I ended up meeting one of the assistant programmers on Sonic 2. And he gave me amazing stuff about like how the US team and Japanese team just did not get along at all. And like Sonic 2 was just like a huge pain in the ass to develop. So to answer your question, the EA stuff was just natural because like I grew up playing EA games and I just wanted to find good stories. And it's happened before where I've interviewed developers and I'm like, no one's like, you're not giving me anything to like write about, so I can't feature you. One example, there's a really rare, like obscure game on PS1 called LSD, Dream Simulator, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And super rare, like weird ass game, only came out in Japan. And I got a hold of the creator. And I sent him questions. And he sent me back like 350 words of answers, like one sentence each. And I messaged him back and I'm like, I can't use this. I'm like, we need to speak more. And he never answered me. He still has time. I would love for him to answer me. But if he doesn't, then he doesn't. But I'm not going to just throw something in the book just because I got it. And I'm sure there are people out there that would like to know like what he said. He said some cool stuff, but it's not enough to like justify a chapter. And it's not a coffee table book, so I can't just put like the little thing in there. So to answer your question, it's just like I was trying to be guided by like you guys we're all roughly like the same age, so it's kind of like what did we play as kids? What stuck out at us? I wanted the book to feel like you were walking into like Blockbuster. And you had all of these games for all these different consoles all out there. And it was just like a smorgasbord. Like I want people to go to the table of contents and just be like, he's got Genesis, he's got PlayStation 4, he's got an iPhone game. What the fuck? Like this is all over the place, but like all over the place in like the best way possible, you know?
Sure.
So with the EA stuff, I mean, you can't write a video game book and not talk about what EA did. Because like what EA, I mean, people shit on them all the time now because of the microtransactions and this and that. But I mean, you have some of the best and brightest people at EA in the late 80s, early 90s, that to the point where like you would not have yearly sports games without them. And then they made so much money with yearly sports games that like a lot of other franchises were like, you know what, we should release a game a year. And that's why you had Silent Hill games coming out like once a year for like 5 years. And they're like, yo, these games suck now. But they were trying to keep pace because they knew Madden and FIFA were going to sell 4 or 5 million copies every year. So they wanted a piece of that, you know? So EA has had a huge impact on the industry. So it's again, if you're not gonna like talk about EA in a video game book, it's not the smartest decision. So
yeah,
right.
That was definitely like a company you like. I think that as kids, like that was one of the first companies you recognized on a cover, and you're like, I need to play this. And like some of the experimentation and the stuff they put out in the early 3D days, even stuff like on 3DO and early PlayStation and Saturn, like man, EA was everywhere and it was good. I mean, it was good for a long time.
Well, see, that's the thing too. A lot of people don't realize that the creator and founder of EA, Trip Hawkins, left EA and he founded the 3DO company. You know, so when you had like Madden, I'm pretty sure Madden 96 and NHL 96 were canceled on the PS1. They didn't come out that year. And that's the reason why Game Day and NHL Face-Off were such huge hits for like the first 3 or 4 years, because they ended up building a fan base because these people wanted to play football and hockey games and they just latched onto the Sony property. But those games came out on 3DO. You know, like EA invested big time in 3DO because they respected Trip Hawkins, because Trip Hawkins was like this huge visionary. And I mean, he originally didn't want to get involved with the Sega Genesis. And then he just saw it, he eventually saw it as a huge opportunity to take these sports simulations that they were doing to like a completely different level, because he really loved like the power behind the Genesis, what the Genesis was able to do that the Amiga and like the other PC consoles that they were working on at the time couldn't do. So there's a lot of cross section between EA and 3DO, but then 3DO's business model sucked ass and kind of led to the death of the company.
Yeah, $800 for a console. I mean, it was a great concept to like have the manufacturers set the price, but yeah, it was rough for kids. I remember like one kid who had one back in the day. I was like, "What the hell's a 3DO?" It's like, "Well, it's like a super advanced Super Nintendo." I was like, "Cool." Never saw one again.
Do you want to play Super Nintendo? Yeah.
And the thing is, what a lot of people don't know is there's so many variants of it. There's like the Magnavox one. There's like different companies made them. I mean, I had one in my hands a couple of months ago, and I was just like, wow. I mean, like Road Rash is really sexy on the 3DO. There's a couple like really cool games on it. But in the next book, The Minds Behind the Shooter Games, I get Rebecca Heinemann, who did Wolfenstein on 3DO. She talks about how the business model was just fucked from the beginning.
Yeah.
You know? So, and that was a really cool chapter. So you find out like she ported like all of the versions of Wolfenstein that most people play, like the Super Nintendo version, the 3DO version, the Jaguar version, you know? So she's a maniac, you know? She did it in like 2 weeks. Like,
wow.
Yep. So that was a really fun chapter.
So I have a question because like, you know, us on the podcast here and like we've all dabbled to certain extents with like YouTube and passion projects and throwing local conventions. And like, do you ever find yourself pouring so much into your writing and your projects and, you know, the VO work that like it changes your passion for the hobby for the worse? Or has that not been an issue for you?
That's a great question. That's an awesome question. If like Robert De Niro was here, he'd be like, yo, you're good, yo. There have definitely been times doing VO for games where I felt like I was underpaid. That I felt like my contributions weren't appreciated at times.
Sure.
Absolutely. Like there were a couple of times on the Padre where I was just kind of like, in the beginning, it's like, yeah, you're investing in me. Thank you so much. Blah, blah, blah. But then it's just like on other points, it's like, this game probably doesn't happen sometimes because if I'm not here, this game might not have been released the way that it was. And then I felt like when we were working on the sequel, I almost didn't join the team because they were looking to save money, and they were kind of like hanging me for a couple of days, like, oh, you know, we'll figure it out. And I'm just like, well, what's to figure out? Like every review said the VO was good, that the VO like sold the game, you know? So that all got washed out, you know, and I have a great relationship with these guys, but it's just like, I was just like, wow, this is the way it works, you know? It's just kind of like, you guys remember like the 3rd or 4th season of Ninja Turtles where like they changed the voice of like Donatello or whatever, and you're just like, what the fuck? That's a different voice, you know?
Yep.
And I'm just like, you're gonna do that? I ain't no Donatello, you know. So there's definitely been moments like that. I mean, I worked on a game called the Caillou Offensive on Steam. It's basically like a top-down version of Rampage.
Okay.
It looks like the original Grand Theft Auto. It's a lot of fun, and I did narration and I wrote like the basic plot for the game and stuff like that. And I wasn't paid like that well, but there was only like 2 or 3 guys working on it, you know? So I put a lot into that. They bought a copy of my book, which was nice, you know? But I mean, I ended up having to go on Moby Games. I'm sure you guys know Moby Games. And I had to create the page for the game. And to me, that's just like, I just did voiceover as a narrator. And I'm like, but I want people to know about this game because it's fun and I did work on it. And I'm just like, wow, if I didn't take like the hour out of my life to like make that page, some people would never even know that the game existed.
Sure.
You know, and I'm just like, I like to surround myself with people that work as hard as I do. And sometimes that's been a problem for me. And it's like a total turnoff. You know, it's like if I feel like you're hustling and you're like right beside me, then let's do this, like ride or die. Let's do this. But then it's just like when I start to see like people like slow down a little bit, I'm just like, like, come on, let's go. So there's been a couple of times where I've just felt like people didn't work as hard as I did. Sure. I will say, like, I mentioned that I do narration for Tony Barnes' upcoming game. That guy's an animal. That guy is one of the hardest. Like you talk about like one man band. He does all the music in the game. He does everything. And I'm just like, he'll show me screenshots and I'm just like, bro, man, like I can't do that. And it's not that often that I say that, that I look at somebody and just are in like complete awe of how hard they work and how passionate they are. And that happens to me like every time I interview a developer. I sit down with like Howard Scott Warshaw and we talk about how he created a world in 5 weeks. And I'm just like, I couldn't do that. And I think like when you meet people like that, it inspires you to do more. So yeah, I've had a couple of like crappy situations, but for the most part, like I've been surrounded by a lot of great people that have pushed me to work even harder. It's like every year, December 31st, I go on my computer and I like do like a control V or whatever, and I highlight all the articles that I've written for the year, and I see the number that comes up. And every year I expect that number to go down. Like, oh, this year I wasn't as productive as I was the year before because, this year I had a kid, or this year I did this, this year I did that. And for the last 15 years, every year it goes up higher. And I'm just like, I'm a good dad. I'm a good husband. I'm a good college professor. Like, I'm eventually going to have to slow down, like I'm not going to be able to like keep this up my entire life, but I'm going to try my hardest, to do everything that I can to like make sure that people get what they deserve. And like, there's so many people out there that like will connect to these stories if they knew about them. And it's like one of the reasons why I'm here. You guys have a great show, and it's just so many people. I have 3 books out now, and I get messages like every couple of days from people that are like, they want to buy the first book. And I'm just like, well, to be honest, I'm like, the second book is written better. The third book is written a ton better. And they're like, no, I'll start from the beginning. So it's like the first book is still selling well.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's crazy. So it's just like, at the end of the day, in spite of like some hiccups here and there, for the most part, I've met so many great people that have just made me want to work like as hard as I possibly can on this, and my daughter gets such a kick out of like seeing, like, she's 3, seeing like me on YouTube and things like that. Or like I was just on there's a weekly newspaper in Brooklyn and I was on the cover today. They interviewed me for the third book. Yeah. My wife was like, oh, that's my hubby, like on Facebook and stuff like that. And, it's just, that stuff is so much cooler than every once in a while, something stupid happening and people bickering. And that's the thing too, a lot of people don't get, like, crunch is so real. There have been times where it's just like, yeah, we need you to get this done today. And it's like, I'm a full-time college professor. Like, I have kids. Like, I have a wife, and got to get it done. It's hard. It's not for everybody. Yeah. But then at the same time, too, everybody thinks that they can do it. You have all of these people on Reddit and this place and that place. Oh, that game sucks. I could have did it better. No, you couldn't. The first, like the founding fathers of the video game industry, these guys knew physics to the point where like they could launch a rocket. They were that intelligent. They created flying in video game form. Do you understand how intelligent you have to be? They created the mathematical equations for a ball to go from someone's hand through a hoop. Like crazy stuff. So it's just like, that's the problem with video games. Like, you look at Tom Cruise or like, a great actor. Why did I say Tom Cruise? Like Paul Newman or somebody like that. And you're just like, man, look at this guy. I can't do that. You look at Meryl Streep and you're like, yeah, I can't do that. You watch like Prince play guitar, and sing like, Purple Rain, and you're like, yeah, I can't do that shit. But the average person that plays video games, they'll play like The Last of Us 2 and be like, I could have did better than that shit. It's like, no, you couldn't. You couldn't. Right. So that's kind of like why I tell these stories, because these people deserve so much more credit. It's like you could be in Starbucks next to one of your favorite game developers of all time, and you have no idea what they look like.
Yep.
Yeah.
You have no idea what their life has been like. I can't tell you how many developers have told me stories where they're just like, yeah, man, these 2 little punk bastards are talking about my game. And I'm just like, well, da-da-da. And the kids are like, well, fuck you. What do you know? Well, you old bastard. And he's like, no, well, I created the game. Google it right now. And they're like, I don't need to Google it. You're too old to have made that game. Blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, wow, man, holy crap. So I want to I want to be an advocate for the video game industry. I want to be a protector for video game history. And I want these guys to get the credit that they deserve, because it's like they totally deserve more credit. It's not fun to get your art shit on by people that have the slightest clue how to create it, but they'll appreciate it, so that's the thing.
Yeah. On top of it being a team effort too, that's even harder to pull together,
Well, that's the thing too. So like for the Minds Behind the Shooter games, I interviewed the narrative director for the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So all that guy, well, not all that guy, but he wrote the story for the game. He guided the story. So it's like that guy has a great story, because there's a very strong female protagonist in the new Modern Warfare and stuff like that. And some people didn't like that, and he explains why they went that route and this and that. But it's like that guy has a story. But there's also like 200 other people that worked on Call of Duty,
right?
And I guarantee you they'll have a story too. It's so different now between games made today and games made 25 years ago. Games made 25 years ago, it was like 2 or 3 people. Like Jungle Strike only had 7 people on the team, and like they gave everybody credit. But there was only like 2 or 3 people that did like background graphics or this and that. So there was only like a core of like 2 or 3 people making a game like that. I mean, holy shit, it's insane.
Call of Duty is an interesting one too, because you think about that and you're in charge of writing this amazing story and these characters, and then you're attached to this property where right out the gate that 50% of the people buying the game are never going to experience that because they're going to only go to team deathmatch. God, that's got to be so frustrating.
That's got to be, and we talked about some of that in the book. They take things with stride, and they're kind of just at the end of the day, as long as people are playing it and they care about it, if you could touch somebody in a little way. I remember when the first Padre came out, it's definitely not Call of Duty, but one of my students messaged me on Facebook, and it went into my, my filtered section because he wasn't my friend and stuff like that. So it's a month later, I go in my filtered section on Facebook and I see a message from one of my students, and he's just like, "Oh, professor, sorry to bother you, but I'm stuck on the 2nd floor in the mansion. And all I hear is you telling me that the door's locked. Where do I go?" And I'm just like, "Oh my God." So it's if you have one moment like that, it makes everything worth it, because you've got to have a thick skin. People are going to shit on you, and it's to the point where now that I have 3 books out, I have people that will go, "Oh, well, if you're doing a shooter book, you better have Call of Duty in there, or I'm not going to buy it." And I'm just like, do you have any idea how fucking hard it is to get these people to speak to you?
Right.
I spoke to Activision. I must have exchanged 30 emails. And then if it wasn't for Eric Holmes, who did Battlefield, Hulk Ultimate Destruction, he hooked me up with Lee Perry, who did Gears of War, and then just so on and so on and so on. And it started rolling. Another guy had a tremendous amount of faith in me. And I had an in, it would have been so hard, and then I'm happy that you guys mentioned this before, but it's super hard to get these people that are American and North American that speak English. But the Japanese developers are next to impossible, because the culture is basically I made this, you experience whatever you want to experience. It's a job. I move on to the next thing. And it's no. What was your life like when you were doing this? What was the process like? I've been super lucky that I've gotten, maybe 7 or 8 Japanese developers. But I remember when I was doing the Sega book, a couple of weeks ago, when I was wrapping up the Sega book, I got Sega to hook me up with Riko Kodama, who she's the princess of the RPG. She did all the Phantasy Star games on the Genesis and stuff. And she gave me great answers, but she's very close knit, not nearly as in depth as some of the other people, because that's what the culture is. But to the average gamer, they're like, "Oh, what was the story behind Mario?" And I'm like, they're not going to tell you in the same depth that a North American game developer is going to tell you. The North American game developer grew up on VH1 Behind the Music and ESPN 30 for 30 and Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted, and they and reality shows, and they love that shit. In Japan, it's just this is your job, you do it to the best of your ability, and you're humble, and you don't shit talk and stuff. So every time I get a good Japanese developer, I get super happy to get them in the book, but it's so hard. So it's like sometimes in a book, somebody will go, "Oh, how come you didn't get this game?" And I'm just like, that entire team was Japanese. Like, and then the thing is too, what the Japanese companies used to do is they wouldn't have their real names on the credits.
Right.
So it's like if you don't do a ton of research, you don't know that Phoenix Ri is Riko Kadama. You know, if you don't really know your shit, you'll never find out who some of these aliases are. You know, so that's just like, to any of my readers that ever look through my books and go, man, you've got a lot of like North American, you know, gamers, and a lot of like UK. The UK game development scene is amazing. There's so many great companies, you know, Argonaut, and, you know, like a lot of people don't know, but like Star Fox. I mean, Dylan Cuthbert, you know, he was 17 years old, created the Super FX chip, you know. Those guys have been a lot more forthcoming than Japanese developers. I would love to speak to more, you know, and I continue to pitch them, but it's hard. So,
right.
Yeah, and I think in Japan, it's very much like we were talking about, how you don't want to be the publisher name. You want to get to know the developer. The culture there is just that you work to make the publisher big, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's still going on. I mean, even Kojima.
Even today, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And Kojima's a rarity because he's a name, and he's always made sure that he was a name. He's very much a North American developer in a Japanese body, you know? So, because he knows he's a cool motherfucker, you know?
Yeah.
And he understands how important a personal brand is. You know, it's like, I mean, right now I'm wearing like a Minds Behind the Games shirt. You know, I've got like a Minds Behind the Games mask. You know, when I go outside, it's like, you've got to represent yourself. You've got to be a brand all the time. You've got to have brand awareness. You know, it's just like, I'm a big like proponent of like, you know, entrepreneurialism, and I love like Gary Vaynerchuk and stuff like that. And you've got to like have a lot of faith in yourself and what you can deliver every single day. And great developers have that. You know, they understand like what they bring to a team and things like that. And Kojima, absolutely. He knows who the hell he is. He knows his worth. He knows how he could change the face of a game by just being involved in it. So,
man, we've covered a lot of ground. It's all been very interesting too.
This has been awesome.
One more question: when do you sleep? Because I was looking.
I'm probably going to be up for another couple of hours. So, what were you looking at?
I was looking at your reviewfix.com, and the number of articles that you do in total and on a daily basis is insane. I mean, and the topics covered between wrestling and, you know, music, it's just insane.
Theater, yeah. I've just, like I said, every year I do more, and I'm like kind of like perfect example. Once we get done, it's like 11 o'clock here. So I'm probably going to throw on Impact because I do like tons of professional wrestling stuff. I love professional wrestling. And I'll do that. And then I'll go to bed probably by like 1, and then my son will probably be up by like 6:30. So, and if I sleep through it, then my wife is awesome. That's the thing. I get to do a lot because like my wife's a maniac. Like, she stays up late. She does like tons of shit. She makes like a lot of this possible. If I was with somebody that bitched and moaned every time I had to do something, it would be so much harder, and I'd probably be single. You know, I'd be like Steve Carell, like the 40-year-old virgin and stuff like that, you know, in a room surrounded by like pop culture shit. Instead, I have a wife and 2 kids and a cat and a dog and a little man cave. So, I mean, she's responsible for a lot of that. Like, she understands. And it's hard sometimes, you know. It's hard, like, you know, you're trying to pitch somebody or you're trying to do research on your phone and you're getting yelled at to put down your phone, and you know she's right. You know, it's hard, but it gets done. And, you know, it's like, I started this journey like 4 years ago, and my 4th book is going to be out like in December. And I've got like at least two. The Genesis book is finished. The PlayStation book is like pretty close to finished. So I find ways to make it work. And see, that's the thing. It's just like, if you really want something, you're going to find ways to work. You're going to adapt. I mean, I know so many people through COVID that have just made this like such an excuse. Like, oh, you know, everything's closed. I can't do this. I can't do that. Da, 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 da. And I remember I sent in a book like a month after the COVID stuff started. I've got another book that's getting ready to be sent in. I'm doing VO in my man cave while all this stuff is going on. I'm teaching 4 classes a day in my man cave, coming out during like my 20-minute breaks, helping my wife change diapers, do dishes, change the cat box, yell at the dog. Like if you want something, you make it work. I post a shit ton on Instagram. Like it's like stream of consciousness for me. I post like 40, 50 pictures a day on Instagram, just like, oh, you guys ever hear of this game? Oh, what game is this? Like just to have conversations with people, just to interact with people. Because that's like the thing too. Why do we create art? To interact with people. And I basically wrote these books because I wanted to have a different type of conversation with gamers. And to go back to like, do I sleep? Probably less than the average person, but I go to bed every night. Like tonight, I'll go to bed being like, yo, man, I had a great conversation with these guys, and I'll wake up in the morning. I have another podcast tomorrow and I have articles that I have to do tomorrow. And I have like 4 loads of laundry that I have to do tomorrow. So it's just like every day shit has to get done. And if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. And then that's the thing. Once you get used to not doing shit, once you get used to shit not getting done, then it becomes like natural.
Sure.
And that's a problem. So for me, I'd rather set the bar as high as possible and just try and reach it every single day. And then if I just touch it, I don't have to hold on to it. If I could just touch it by the end of the day, then I'm good, because that's farther than most people, So sleep is overrated. I tell my students all the time, like, I just want 8 hours of sleep. When? Like when? Just do what you got to do, So yeah, sleep's overrated.
Yeah. They need to give you a TED talk or something. This has been super uplifting.
I hope. That's the thing too. It's like I've had students before come back like after like 10 years, and they're like, oh, you really affected me. And like I have no idea. Like I don't know if I bored you guys for like the last hour or not. I have no idea if I
not at all.
Thank you. But it's just like at the end of the day, all you could do is share your story and hope to affect somebody in like a tiny way, and like that's my biggest thing. Like at the end of the book, like I just want people to go, you know what, I'm going to download Night Trap on Switch, or oh, you know what, I'm going to go and download Squids on iPhone because it sounds really cool. Like that's what I want. I want these developers to get recognition, because if these developers get recognition through what I wrote, then I win too. And then everybody grows. Like I've been on podcasts where the people had like 50 followers, and they're like, well, you have like thousands of followers on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and stuff. Why would you want to be on my show? I'm like, because I don't know those 50 people that follow you, and I want to connect with those 50 people, So that's kind of like at the end of the day, I just want to continue to reach as many people. Tony Barnes, again, I mention him all the time because I love him. He's like, I'm the biggest thing that you don't know about yet. And it's the truth. This guy's sold tens of millions of games, and people don't know who the hell he is.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me. So it's like, for me, it's like, that's kind of like the boat that I'm into. Like I'm writing these books, and a lot of people don't know who I am. So that's why I have to do podcasts all the time. And that's why I have to talk to people more. And that's why I can't be like, I don't know, like Pat Contry or John Hancock and just go on my YouTube and be like, oh, I'm cool. Blah, 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 blah. I can't do that. I have to go out and bust my ass every single day, But I am a firm believer that if we have a blind taste test between my stuff and any of those people that have hundreds of thousands of followers, you're going to pick this mug over that. So it's just a matter of time. You just got to keep hustling. So I
love it.
Yeah, it's a great perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
So,
well, since we're getting to the end of the conversation here, do you have anything you want to plug specifically, or places to check out where we can find you?
Yeah, sure. So on Twitter, I'm at ReviewFixPat. Instagram is like my preferred place to communicate on social media. It's just so much fun for me. Like Twitter is like, there's not enough room to talk. That's why I just post articles on there. Or if I see somebody that likes a status, like that's how I came across you guys. I saw you liked one of the podcasts that I was on, and I was just like, all right, let me reach out. You guys want guests, blah, blah, blah. Like I do my own PR basically. So Instagram, I'm at Patrick Hickey Jr. You guys can buy the book at patrickhickeyjr.com/books. That's probably the best place to buy the book, because it's like I will personalize your book. I'll write something in there depending on where you're from. I will throw in hockey cards, baseball cards, football cards, like anything cool to kind of like connect with you. I'll throw my Walter Day trading card in there. And I want to have a relationship with you. You know, I don't want to marry you, but I want to be able to.
Oh, okay. I'm out.
Just a bastard child or two? Come on.
Yeah, you know, like maybe we'll take a bath together or something like that. No, I won't. This is the thing. It's like, I remember when I would do book signings before COVID, so much fun. You know, and I would get to talk to people, and the bookstore owners would get pissed because I would have real conversations with people. But that's what I do, you know, and COVID, you can't do that. So if you buy the book from me, I know where you live. That sounds really creepy, but I'm going to email you and I'm going to be like, oh, you're from Philadelphia. You're a Flyers fan, blah, blah, blah. And we'll have a conversation. I'll put some cool stuff in your book and I'll tell you, like, you know, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter. We'll talk, because I feel like that's important. You know, I've been to so many terrible book signings over the years where it's just like the person signs your book and then you're off, you know, and it's like, I never want to do that. My book is not cheap. You know, it's $40. It's from an academic publisher. It's in, you know, Harvard's library, it's in Stanford's library, it's in UCLA, UC Berkeley, all these great colleges. Like, I'm fully comfortable saying that, like, in 25 years, these books are going to be a lot more important than they are now. But I'm not going to wait 25 years to have a connection with you. If you buy the book, I want to know what you liked. I want to know what you didn't like. I want to know what games you want to hear more about, so I could put them in a book, like all of those things. So patrickhickeyjr.com/books. Let's talk. Let's have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, this is great. We'll have to do this again in a year when you've got like 5 more voiceover work things done, like 12 more books, 1 million more articles. I'm sure you'll have plenty of new stuff at the rate you're going.
Yeah, there's lots of crazy stuff on the horizon. Like, I just, for the PlayStation book, I just confirmed like Grand Theft Auto 2, Driver. So like the PlayStation book is so sexy. Twisted Metal, Jet Moto. Oh, like I cannot wait for people to get a hold of, like, the shooter book is next. But then the Genesis book is the biggest book that I've done so far. And then I'm not going to stop writing the PlayStation book until the PlayStation book has at least one more game than the Genesis book. So it's going to be really, like, the next year is going to be a ton of fun. And I loved hanging out with you guys. So I would be more than honored to come by again.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking all that out.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you for picking up the book. It means a lot.
Yeah, no, it's great. I've had a good read. I actually was doing a little bit more reading today, going back through some of the stuff I passed up the first time, because I'm like, well, I'm not sure about this one. But then you go back and, like, I don't know. It's all, like I said, it's just really nice. Like you pointed out on the train, digestible pieces. So even if it's something you didn't think you would find something interesting in, you do inevitably. And they're all just nice little chapters. It's good. I'm looking forward to the newer books too. And the lineup for that PlayStation one sounds amazing. I kind of want to. That was such a pivotal era for, like, our generation, like that early teens, and, like, I don't know, that to me, PlayStation was like, I can't believe that I'm going to continue gaming and it's still connecting with me as I'm growing up, because, you know, the industry shifted there. So it's going to be fun.
It's like, I'll give you guys some exclusiveness right now. I'm talking to 2 members of the Final Fantasy VII team right now.
Oh, wow.
And like, they haven't, like, given me their answers yet, or the releases, so it's not, like, officially confirmed, but it's like just the fact that these guys got back to me. You know, it's like, because so mmany people were like, well, if you're going to do a PlayStation game, a PlayStation book, you've got to get, like, Crash Bandicoot, and Crash Bandicoot is confirmed. It's in. They're like, well, then you've got to do Twisted Metal, and it's like, Twisted Metal's in. You've got to do, like, at least one Square Soft RPG, and Parasite Eve is in. So I'm, like, checking off all these boxes, and people are like, oh, this looks so cool, blah, 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 NHL 98. Like, there's so many great things in there, and they're like, did you get Final Fantasy VII? And I'm just like, I hate you. I hate you.
Right.
I've given you everything.
They're going to ask, right?
Yeah. So then I just, like, again, the other day, you know, my wife was out and both my kids were sleeping, and I'm sitting here in the kitchen trying to be quiet. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to start pitching people. And I got 2 people from the American side of the games development. And it's just like, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. So it's just,
awesome.
You know, the PlayStation book is going to be super special. It's because you deserve it. I mean, you deserve it. You grew up during that time. You want to know more. And that's great journalists are selfless. They keep their opinions out of their work, you know, and they try and deliver stories by other people to you in a easily digestible format, elegantly organized. Like, that's what journalism is all about. So, like, that's what that's what I'm trying to do. So thank you guys for being a part of that.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Looking forward to it, and thanks so much again for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Absolutely.
Okay, I don't know what you guys thought. That was a fun conversation.
Incredible.
I think we talked to a robot. That guy is a machine.
Oh, I could have sat there and just listened for hours. I mean, I see why he's a professor and a lecturer. I mean, I'd sit in that class for days.
Yeah, he's something else.
That's great.
I feel like I can fly after that.
Yeah, it was very uplifting too. Just the guy's attitude and work ethic and passion for what we love. You know, video games, the history behind it, the people in it, the industry.
Kills it.
But that was great. But it is probably time that we wrap it up.
Oh, it's always important to wrap it up.
It's true. Yes.
It is very true. Patrick,
true.
Thanks for joining us on the show. It was awesome having you. Friends and fellow podcasters, we have an email.
We did.
This is a big deal. We have an email, and I get to read it.
You do?
Finally, an email. So it says, "Hi, guys. Just a little email to tell you how much I love your podcast. Keep up the great work." And I'm going to butcher this. Cestus? Perhaps Cestus saying hi from France. That's pretty awesome.
Longtime follower of the podcast. We appreciate it. We appreciate you taking the time to send an email too. That's it's not something that people take the time to do these days. So thanks so much.
Yeah. Pretty awesome.
We'll try to get Nate to make some more videos too.
I'll work on it.
If he would stop crashing his drones into the Red River, it would probably help.
That's another story.
That's a story for next time.
Next podcast I will share. I'm still getting over the 100 T-Rexes that have shown up to my house. So just to carry that story on. But friends, join Cestus from France by sending some emails to us.
We'll read them.
At weekendrentalpodcast@gmail.com. Send those emails to us. Make sure you're following us on all of our social medias, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of those great places. And you can find all things Weekend Rental at weekendpodcast.com. And as always, friends, be kind, rewind.
Bread's done. Bananas?
Bananas.